They say the deepest kind of loneliness isn't the kind that surrounds you when you're alone. It's the kind that takes up residence inside your chest, quietly, patiently, until you can't even recognize the sound of your own heart anymore. And on Christmas Eve of 1891, in the far reaches of rural Vermont, where the hills rolled like frozen waves and the pine forest stood black against the winter sky, there lived a man whose loneliness was as wide as the land he owned. A man who had built fences not only around his farm, but around the shattered remains of his life. Welcome to Stories of the Season. If you're new here, subscribe right now so you don't miss the next story, and in the comments, tell us your name and where you're listening from. I read every single comment, and I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now settle in, get comfortable, because this story is going to move you. Because sometimes, the greatest miracles don't come with trumpets or lightning. Sometimes, they arrive soaking wet in the middle of a storm, with a child's cry and a mother's desperate knock at the gate. The colonel who never fought a war. His name was Colonel James Caldwell. But he wasn't a colonel because he had marched into battle. He was a colonel because in the old America, especially in places like Vermont, where families carried titles like heirlooms, people called a man colonel when his name came with land, money, and influence. And James Caldwell had all three. Caldwell Farm sprawled across the valley like a kingdom made of snow and timber. The barns were bigger than some churches. The main farmhouse, painted a hard, dignified white, had a wraparound porch, tall windows, and thick beams that had stood through decades of storms. The Caldwells had owned that land since before most of the roads had names. And James, at 42, carried that legacy on his shoulders like a weight he could never set down. In the village, people spoke of him in hushed tones. Some called him proud. Some called him cold. Some called him fair but distant, like a mountain you could admire from afar but never truly approach. And on the inside, James Caldwell was a man who felt like a house after a fire. Still standing, but empty. The farmhouse that had learned to grieve. The Caldwell farmhouse was beautiful in the way old things are beautiful, because they've survived. Inside, the rooms were lined with dark wood and heavy curtains. The floors creaked with history. Oil lamps glowed on side tables. A grand staircase curved up to the second floor where bedrooms sat silent behind closed doors. There were framed portraits on the walls, stern-faced men and women staring out from another century. There were rugs from the city. A piano no one touched anymore. China that only came out for holidays. Holidays that no longer happened. And despite the warmth of fireplaces and the polish of furniture, the house carried a chill that wasn't from winter. It was the chill of a home that had once been filled with laughter, and had forgotten what laughter sounded like. James kept the place immaculate. That was what his father would have demanded. But he lived in only a few rooms, as if the rest of the house belonged to ghosts. His refuge was the library. The one room where grief felt almost organized. His refuge, the library. The library was lined floor to ceiling with books, their spines worn and dark. Some were classics. Some were histories. Some were farming manuals and ledgers. There were maps pinned to the wall showing land boundaries, shipments, and trade routes, anything that let a man pretend he was still in control. A fire crackled low in the hearth. James sat in his favorite chair with a glass of bourbon on the side table. Not because he loved the taste, but because the burn in his throat was one of the few sensations that reminded him he was still alive. Outside, the wind dragged itself across the valley like something searching for shelter. Inside, the house was quiet enough that he could hear the tick of the clock, and the sound of his own thoughts. And his thoughts, always, led him back to one place. 4 years ago. The year everything ended. 4 years earlier, in the late summer of 1887, sickness had come through the region in a way no one expected. Not like a dramatic plague with bells and quarantine flags. It came quietly, carried by travelers, spreading through villages and farms, taking hold in lungs and blood until strong men fell to their knees. Some called it a fever. Some called it influenza. Some called it the summer death. To James, it had one name: loss. His wife, Evelyn, had been the kind of woman who made a room feel warmer just by entering it. She had been raised in a schoolteacher's home, surrounded by books and music, and she had brought that gentle strength into the Caldwell house like sunlight. When she married James, she didn't simply become the colonel's wife. She became the heart of the farm. She organized meals for the workers. She helped families in hard winters. She kept a small reading room for the children of hired hands, because she believed that learning was a kind of freedom nobody should be denied. James had admired that about her. Sometimes he'd even smiled. And their son. Their son had been the reason the house had once sounded alive. Samuel Caldwell, 6 years old. Wild curls. Muddy boots. A laugh that seemed too big for his body. He followed James everywhere, asking questions, tugging at his sleeve, pleading to see the horses, begging to ride someday like his father. Someday, James would say. He always thought there would be time. And then James had gone to Burlington to finalize a contract for winter supplies, believing he'd return within days. It was supposed to be routine. The kind of trip he'd taken 100 times. He left Evelyn and Samuel safe in the house. He left them with Mr. Amos Reed, the foreman who had served his family for decades. He left them with Mrs. Ruth Harper, the housekeeper who had raised James after his mother died. He left them, because he believed the world followed rules. But sickness doesn't care about rules. The message that broke him. The telegram arrived at the hotel in Burlington late at night. James remembered how the paper felt in his hands, thin, trembling, too fragile to carry the words that destroyed him. Sir. Come home. Evelyn and the boy very ill. Doctor says it is bad. Please. James didn't even pack. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He drove his horse hard through the night, stopping only to change mounts, his mind stuck on one thought. I have to get there in time. But time, cruel and indifferent, didn't wait. When James finally reached the gate of Caldwell Farm, the sky was turning the color of ash. Mr. Amos Reed was on the porch, hat in his hands, his face carved with dread. Amos didn't speak. He didn't need to. James knew before his boots hit the steps. Evelyn had died before dawn. Samuel followed before sunset, as if a child's heart simply couldn't bear a world without his mother. They had placed them in the parlor, side by side, dressed in white. Evelyn looked peaceful, as if she were sleeping. Samuel looked too small, like a doll forgotten on a shelf. James had fallen to his knees and made a sound that didn't belong to a man. A raw, broken animal sound. He screamed until his voice turned into something unrecognizable. And after that, something inside him went silent. He buried them beneath the old pine tree behind the house, the one Evelyn used to stand beneath in summer, reading while Samuel chased butterflies. A simple stone marked their names. And James never went back to that spot again. Because he couldn't. Because it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. For years of existing. After Evelyn and Samuel died, the farm did not stop. The animals needed feeding. The workers needed wages. The barns needed repairs. Winter still came. James continued running Caldwell Farm with the precision of a machine. He paid his people. He kept the business alive. But the man who had once held his son up on his shoulders. That man was gone. Mrs. Ruth Harper tried to reach him. James, she'd say, using the name she'd used when he was a boy, Evelyn wouldn't want you like this. Amos Reed tried too. Colonel, the men are asking if we'll have the Christmas supper like we used to. James would stare at his ledger and say, no. The village pastor came by once a month. God gives us burdens we can bear, he'd say softly. James would laugh without humor and reply, then God has never met me. And slowly, the house learned a new tradition. Silence. Christmas Eve, 1891. That Christmas Eve arrived like a verdict. Snow had been falling all day, soft and heavy, muffling the world. The fields were blanketed in white. The trees were dark and still. Workers had finished early and returned to their cabins. In town, families were gathering. Children were singing. Candles were being lit. At Caldwell Farm, there were no candles in windows. No wreaths on the door. No smell of cinnamon or pine. Only James in the library, the fire burning low, a bottle of bourbon beside him like a poor substitute for warmth. Amos Reed had come to the library earlier, hat in hand. "Sir," Amos had asked carefully, "the hands are wondering if we'll have the Christmas supper. It's been a tradition since your father's time." James lifted his eyes from the book he wasn't reading. "A tradition," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "What's there to celebrate?" "Sir, it means a lot to them. Mrs. Caldwell always." "Mrs. Caldwell isn't here," James cut in, voice sharp as a snapped branch. "And the traditions died with her." Amos had opened his mouth, then closed it. "Yes, sir," he murmured, and left. Downstairs, Ruth Harper had sighed in the kitchen. "For years," she whispered. "For years, and he still refuses to live." The storm arrives. By nightfall, the snow had turned to freezing rain. Wind slammed against shutters. Thunder rumbled over the hills, low and menacing. James poured another drink, staring into the fire like he could burn memories out of his mind. "Another empty Christmas," he muttered to the room. Lightning flashed outside the window, turning the world white for an instant. Rain struck the roof with fury. And then, cutting through the storm like a knife. Bang! 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 A sound at the gate. James frowned, annoyed. Who in their right mind would travel in weather like that? He ignored it. The knocking came again, faster, desperate. And this time, he heard a voice. A woman's voice, thin and strained, almost swallowed by the wind. And beneath it, a child's cry. A sound so small and helpless it curled the air inside James's chest like a fist. He stood abruptly, anger rising. He crossed to the window and threw open the shutter. Rain slapped his face. Down at the iron gate, shapes moved in the dark. Lightning revealed them for split seconds, a woman, hunched against the rain, 3 children pressed against her like birds under a wing. Amos Reed was running down the path with a lantern. James watched him reach the gate, shout something, and then fumble with the lock. The woman staggered, as if she might collapse. James's jaw tightened. He didn't want this. He didn't want noise, problems, need, anything that demanded his heart do more than beat. He turned away. But Amos returned minutes later, soaked, breathless, his face pale. He didn't wait for permission. "Sir," Amos panted. "There's a woman at the gate. 3 children. They're drenched. One's barely more than a toddler. She's begging for shelter. If we turn them away." "Give her money," James said coldly. "Send them to the inn in town. Town's too far. The roads are turning to ice. Those kids won't make it." "Not my problem," James snapped, turning back to the fire. Amos froze, caught between duty and conscience. And then Ruth Harper entered. She was small, gray-haired, and stubborn as winter itself. She had held James as a baby. She had watched him grow into a man. She had buried his grief with him, quietly, in her own way. "James," she said, her voice low but steady. "There are children outside in a storm." James's shoulders tensed. "Then Amos can send them away." Ruth stepped closer. "What kind of man sends children away on Christmas Eve?" James turned, eyes hard. "The kind of man who wants to be left alone." Ruth's gaze didn't flinch. The kind of man Evelyn would be ashamed to call her husband. Silence slammed into the room. James's breath stopped. Because Ruth had done what no one else dared to do. She had spoken Evelyn's name like a blade. James's mouth opened, fury rising, then faltering. Ruth's eyes were wet. "You know what she would have done," Ruth whispered. "You know she'd be down there right now, wrapping those babies in blankets, feeding them, telling them they're safe." James stared at the fire, his hand tightening around the back of the chair. Something in him resisted, like a door stuck shut. But another part remembered. He swallowed hard. "Fine," he said, voice rough. "Let them in. One night. Food, dry clothes, a place to sleep. Then they go." Amos exhaled like a man spared. "Yes, sir." Ruth nodded, not triumphant, just relieved. As if a breath had finally returned to a house that had been holding it for years. The woman who would not bow. The iron gate creaked open under Amos's hands. The woman stood there, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face, her body trembling. But her chin stayed lifted. Even in desperation, she did not bow. "I'm sorry," she called over the storm. "I'm sorry to come like this, but my children." Amos lifted the lantern higher, and the light fell on her face. She was young, early 30s, but exhaustion had carved seriousness into her features. Her eyes were green, startling against the darkness, and they glittered with tears she refused to let fall. "Come," Amos urged. Quickly. She clutched the children tighter and stepped through the gate. In that moment, she didn't know she had crossed more than a boundary of land. She had crossed into the life of a man who had forgotten how to be human. Inside the kitchen, heat, bread, and mercy. Ruth Harper met them at the back entrance with towels and a look that said, "Not in my house will children freeze." "Good Lord," Ruth breathed, seeing the little ones. The oldest boy, about 10, stood rigid, drenched, his eyes wary as a grown man's. The girl, 7, maybe, clung to her mother, shivering hard. And the youngest, 4, was barely conscious with cold, his cheeks red and raw. "Inside. Now," Ruth ordered. They were ushered into the kitchen where the stove radiated warmth like salvation. The woman's hands trembled as she tried to help peel wet layers off the children. "Thank you," she whispered. Ruth's voice softened. "No thanks needed. Not tonight." Hot milk was poured. Bread was cut. Butter melted. The youngest child clung to the older boy, whimpering, "I'm cold. I'm cold." "Hush, Will," the boy murmured, hugging him tighter. "We're inside now." Ruth heard the name. Will. She swallowed hard. It wasn't Samuel. But it sounded close enough to pull on a thread inside her chest. The woman finally spoke, her voice steadier than her hands. "My name is Sarah Bennett," she said. "And these are my children. Eli, Maggie, and Will." Eli, 10, kept his back straight like a soldier. Maggie, 7, looked around with wide eyes, as if stepping into a fairy tale. Will, 4, stared at the fire like he didn't believe it was real. Sarah looked like she'd been walking for hours. And Ruth saw something in her, something fierce. Not pride. Not arrogance. Just the determined dignity of a mother who has been forced to become unbreakable. Upstairs, a room that hadn't been used in years. Ruth led them through the hallway, lamps casting golden pools of light on the wood-paneled walls. Sarah's bare feet made almost no sound on the polished floor. She kept glancing around, taking in the portraits, the staircase, the wealth she had never touched. But she didn't reach for it. She didn't gape or beg. She simply moved forward, one step at a time, as if refusing to give fear the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. The guest room was ready within minutes, old linens, thick quilts, a fire started in the small hearth. Ruth opened a wardrobe and hesitated, her hand resting on folded fabric that hadn't been touched in years. Clothes that had belonged to Evelyn. Small shirts that had belonged to Samuel. A pain flashed through Ruth's face like lightning. But she swallowed it. "These will keep the children warm," she said, voice thick. "That's what matters." Sarah's eyes softened. "She was a good woman," Sarah said quietly, not as a question. Ruth turned her head sharply. "How do you know?" "I can feel it," Sarah answered. "This house, it feels like it's been mourning. Only a good heart leaves that kind of echo behind." Ruth blinked hard and looked away, as if refusing to let tears claim her. She handed out the clothes. Oversized, but warm. Maggie twirled in a long nightgown like a princess, and for the first time that night, she smiled. Will giggled at sleeves too long. Even Eli's mouth twitched, the smallest crack in his caution. Sarah changed too, slipping into a plain cotton nightdress that smelled faintly of lavender and memory. Then Ruth pointed to the bed. "All of you. In. Now." Eli hesitated. We don't sleep in rooms like this." Ruth knelt so her eyes were level with his. "My boy," she said gently, "a storm doesn't ask what you deserve. It just comes. And a house doesn't ask what you are. It just shelters. Tonight, you're safe. That's enough." Eli swallowed. Then he climbed into bed, drawing the smaller ones close like a shield. Sarah lay on the edge, her arm around them. And finally, for the first time in what felt like forever, the children slept. The Colonel who couldn't sleep. Downstairs, James Caldwell sat in the library again. His drink was untouched now. The storm still raged outside, but inside the house, he could hear faint movement, Ruth's footsteps, a muffled child's cough, the soft creak of stairs. The sounds irritated him. And unsettled him. Because they sounded like life. And life, in that house, had become unfamiliar. He stared into the fire and told himself he didn't care. One night. That's all. But then he heard something, barely audible, carried through the old wooden bones of the farmhouse. A child's laugh. Just a small one, like a spark. And for a split second, James saw Samuel as he'd been, standing in the doorway, cheeks flushed, asking for one more story, one more ride, one more day. James's throat tightened. He reached for the bourbon. But the burn didn't help. Because what he felt wasn't just pain. It was something far more dangerous. It was the terrifying, fragile beginning of a desire to protect. And that was when James Caldwell realized, with sudden dread. The storm outside might pass by morning. But the storm that had entered his house was only beginning. Christmas morning at Caldwell Farm. Morning came slowly to Caldwell Farm. Not with bells. Not with laughter. But with a pale winter light creeping through frost-laced windows, touching furniture that hadn't known joy in years. James Caldwell woke in his bedroom, alone, as he had every morning since Evelyn's death, yet something felt different. The house sounded different. Not loud. Just occupied. He lay still, listening. There were footsteps downstairs. A kettle whistling softly. The muted murmur of voices. Children's voices. His jaw tightened. For a moment, instinct told him to retreat, to stay in bed, to avoid the reminder that strangers had invaded the careful emptiness he'd built around himself. But another voice, quieter and more insistent, whispered. "You let them in." Reluctantly, James rose, dressed, and descended the stairs. The kitchen, alive again. The kitchen was warm when James entered. Too warm. The stove was burning strong. Sunlight spilled across the wooden table. Steam rose from mugs. And there, sitting at the table, were the children. Eli sat straight-backed, hands folded, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. Maggie swung her legs beneath the chair, humming softly to herself. Little Will sat bundled in a blanket, clutching a tin cup of milk with both hands. Sarah Bennett stood at the counter, sleeves rolled up, helping Ruth Harper knead dough. She looked different in daylight. Her hair, dark brown and thick, was pulled back simply. Her face was pale but strong, marked by hardship rather than weakness. And when she noticed James in the doorway, she froze. Ruth noticed first. "Morning, Colonel," she said carefully. The children turned. Maggie's eyes widened. Eli stood immediately. "Good morning, sir," he said, his voice firm, respectful. Sarah turned fully now, meeting James's gaze. She didn't curtsy. She didn't apologize. She didn't beg. She simply placed a hand lightly on Will's shoulder and said, "Good morning. Thank you for letting us stay the night." Her voice was steady. James nodded stiffly. "One night," he said. "As agreed." "Yes," Sarah replied. "Of course." There was no resentment in her tone. Only acceptance. That unsettled him more than anger would have. A meal that felt like a memory. Ruth set a plate in front of James. Fresh bread. Eggs. Butter. A Christmas breakfast, simple, but deliberate. James stared at it. "We weren't planning," he began. "You weren't," Ruth interrupted. "But I was." James shot her a look. She didn't flinch. "You can eat," she added calmly. "Or you can starve out of principle. But the food is here." The children watched silently. James sat. He ate. And with every bite, a memory surfaced. Evelyn laughing as she burned toast. Samuel sneaking extra butter. Voices overlapping. James swallowed hard. Across the table, Maggie studied him openly. "You live in a very big house," she said. Sarah shot her a warning look. "Maggie." "It's all right," James said, surprising himself. Maggie tilted her head. "Is it lonely?" The question landed like a hammer. Sarah inhaled sharply. Eli whispered, "Maggie, stop." James stared at the table. Then, quietly, he answered. "Yes." The honesty shocked even him. Maggie nodded solemnly. "It's lonely when it's too quiet," she said. "Our old place was quiet after Papa died." Sarah's hand trembled. James looked up. "Your husband?" he asked. Sarah nodded. 2 years ago." Silence settled again. But this silence was different. It wasn't empty. It was shared. Sarah Bennett's story. Later that morning, James summoned Sarah to the sitting room. Not as an order. As a conversation. She sat across from him, hands folded, posture straight. "I want to understand why you were walking in a storm with 3 children on Christmas Eve," James said. Sarah met his gaze. "I was evicted." James frowned. "Evicted?" "I worked as a washerwoman for a mill owner in the next county," she explained. "I washed for his household and for several of the workers. And I discovered he was withholding wages. Charging workers for supplies they never received. Docking pay illegally." James's jaw tightened. "And you confronted him?" "Yes." "That was brave," James said. "It was necessary," Sarah replied. "Those men had families." James leaned back. "And his response?" "He told me to leave by nightfall." "On Christmas Eve," James said. "Yes." "With children?" "Yes." James closed his eyes briefly. He knew the man. Charles Hargreave. A businessman with a polished smile and rotten core. James had sold him land years earlier, land that became the mill. I didn't know, James said quietly. But I benefited, Sarah replied gently. And I don't blame you for that. But I won't pretend the system is clean. James opened his eyes. No accusation. No bitterness. Just truth. You could have kept quiet, he said. Protected yourself. Sarah's voice hardened, not angrily, but resolutely. I watched men work 12 hours a day and still go hungry. I couldn't teach my children to accept that. James studied her. And for the first time in years, he felt something stir. Respect. The children find their place. Days passed. The storm cleared. And yet, the Bennett family remained. Not because they refused to leave, but because James didn't ask them to. Eli helped Amos in the stables, learning quickly, working hard. You've got good hands, Amos told him. Strong. Eli smiled, just a little. Maggie discovered the library. Are we allowed? She asked, eyes shining. James hesitated. Then nodded. She spent hours curled on the rug, devouring books Evelyn once loved. And Will followed Ruth everywhere. Are you my grandma? He asked one afternoon. Ruth laughed through tears. Something like that, sweetheart. The house filled with sound again. James pretended not to notice. But he did. Every moment. The village talks. In town, people noticed. The colonel's got children in his house. A woman too. Widow, they say. Scandalous. Or merciful. James didn't care. For once. The confrontation. It came on a gray afternoon. A carriage arrived unannounced. James was in the study when Amos entered. Sir. Mr. Hargreave is here. James stood. Send him away. He insists. Then I insist harder. Hargreave entered anyway, smiling, smug. Colonel Caldwell, he said. Merry Christmas. James didn't offer a seat. You evicted a widow and her children in a storm, James said coldly. Hargreave shrugged. Business. James stepped closer. You will compensate every worker you cheated. Hargreave laughed. And if I don't? James's voice dropped. Then I will expose you. Publicly. Financially. Completely. Hargreave's smile vanished. You wouldn't. James leaned in. I buried my family, he said softly. You have nothing I'm afraid to lose. Hargreave left pale and shaking. Sarah watched from the hallway. Their eyes met. And something unspoken passed between them. The beginning of something dangerous. That night, Sarah found James in the library. I never thanked you, she said. You don't owe me gratitude. Yes, she replied. I do. They stood close. Too close. James felt it. The warmth. The pull. I'm not whole, he warned. I'm not asking you to be, Sarah said. Silence. And then. The first laugh James had allowed himself in 4 years. It startled them both. A dance in the kitchen. New Year's Eve arrived quietly. Ruth played the piano. Maggie sang. Eli clapped. Will slept on the rug. And when the music slowed, James extended his hand. May I? Sarah hesitated. Then nodded. They danced. Simply. Carefully. Two broken people moving around scars. James whispered. I was dead when you arrived. Sarah replied. I was surviving. Not living. They kissed. Not with urgency. With understanding. The house breathes again. That night, James stood alone after everyone slept. The house felt alive. Not because pain was gone, but because love had found space to exist beside it. He whispered into the darkness. "Evelyn. I didn't forget you." And for the first time, he didn't feel guilty for wanting more life. The morning after the dance, James Caldwell woke before dawn. That alone wasn't unusual, sleep had been light for years. But this morning felt different. The weight on his chest wasn't crushing. It was present, but quieter. Like grief that had finally stopped screaming and learned to whisper. He sat at the edge of the bed, hands clasped, replaying the night before. The music. The children's laughter. Sarah's hand in his. And the kiss. It hadn't been reckless. It hadn't been desperate. It had been careful. Which somehow made it more dangerous. James dressed slowly, his movements deliberate, as if moving too quickly might break whatever fragile balance had settled over the house. Downstairs, the fire was already lit. Sarah stood at the window, watching snow drift softly across the fields. She turned when she heard him. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he replied. There was no awkwardness. Only awareness. Unasked questions. They didn't speak about the kiss. Not that day. Or the next. Instead, life filled the space between them. Eli learned to ride properly. Maggie began writing stories, inspired by the books she read. Will followed James everywhere now, tiny boots echoing behind him. "Are you a soldier?" Will asked one afternoon. James smiled faintly. "No. Just a farmer." Will considered this. "You're a good farmer." James swallowed. "I try." Sarah watched it all quietly. She didn't push. She didn't assume. But at night, alone in the guest room, she wrestled with her own fear. She had lost once. Loved once. And loving again meant risking everything. A visit from the past. In February, winter tightened its grip. And with it came ghosts. A letter arrived for Sarah. The handwriting was familiar. Her hands shook as she opened it. It was from Joseph Bennett's sister, writing from New Hampshire. The letter was kind, but heavy. She spoke of memories. Of Joseph. Of how proud he would be of Sarah. And of how dangerous it could be to let the past fade too quickly. Sarah folded the letter carefully. That night, she cried quietly, long after the children slept. James heard her. He stood outside the guest room, frozen, unsure if he had the right to intrude. Finally, he knocked softly. "Sarah?" The door opened. Her eyes were red. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to disturb." "You didn't," James replied. They sat by the fire. And Sarah spoke of Joseph. Of love that had been gentle, not grand. Of loss that had nearly broken her. "I don't want to replace him," she whispered. "I just don't want to disappear either." James nodded. "I don't want to replace Evelyn," he said. "I just don't want to remain a ghost." They understood each other perfectly. The decision. Spring came slowly. Snow melted. Fields softened. And one morning, Sarah stood in the garden, hand pressed to her mouth, trembling. Ruth noticed immediately. "You're pale." Sarah swallowed. "I think I might be expecting." Ruth's eyes widened. "Oh, my dear." Sarah sat heavily. "What if it's wrong?" she whispered. "What if this is a mistake?" Ruth took her hands. "Life doesn't come from mistakes," she said. "Only from courage." James was told that evening. He went very still. Then he stood. Then he sat again. He didn't speak for a long moment. Sarah braced herself. "I didn't plan this," she said quickly. "And if you want us to leave?" "No," James said firmly. He looked at her, really looked. "I want you to stay. All of you. Permanently." Her breath caught. "James. I don't know how to do this perfectly," he continued. "But I know how to protect. And I know how to love, even if I'm still learning." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. And this time, she didn't hold them back. The proposal. James proposed on a quiet afternoon. No crowd. No grand speech. Just the fields, the sky, and the wind moving through the trees. "I don't promise perfection," he said. "I promise presence." Sarah smiled through tears. "That's all I've ever wanted." They married in late spring. A small ceremony. Amos stood beside James. Ruth cried openly. The children smiled brighter than anyone. Eli stood tall. Maggie scattered flowers. Will clapped at everything. And when James kissed Sarah as his wife, the farm seemed to exhale. A family chosen. Life after marriage was not magically easy. There were arguments. Moments of fear. Nights when memories resurfaced. But there was honesty. And laughter. And patience. James learned to read bedtime stories. Sarah learned the rhythms of farm management. They learned each other. When the baby arrived, a girl with dark hair and strong lungs, James held her with shaking hands. "What's her name?" Ruth asked. Sarah looked at James. "Hope," he said. A different kind of strength. James was no longer just a landowner. He became a protector. A leader. He improved wages. Built better housing. Funded schooling. The farm changed. So did the village. People stopped whispering. They started believing. The return of Christmas. 1 year later. Christmas returned to Caldwell Farm. This time, there were candles. Music. Food. Laughter. James stood at the table, holding hope. Sarah leaned against him. "To storms," he said. "That bring us home," Sarah finished. The children cheered. The kind of love that doesn't erase, it expands. There's a lie grief tells you when it moves into your home. It says, if you love again, you are betraying what you lost. And that lie is powerful because it sounds noble. It sounds loyal. But it isn't. Because real love doesn't shrink. It doesn't ration itself like bread in winter. Real love expands. It makes room. It learns how to live beside memory, without trying to bury it. James Caldwell learned that slowly. Painfully. The way a man learns to walk again after years of limping. He didn't stop missing Evelyn. He didn't stop thinking of Samuel. Some nights, after the house settled and the lanterns were out, he would step onto the porch alone and stare at the pine tree in the distance. He would picture the stone. He would feel that familiar ache rise like a tide. But now, that tide didn't drown him. Because now, behind him, there was a house full of life. Sometimes he could hear Sarah humming while she rocked baby Hope. Sometimes Maggie would whisper a line from a story. Sometimes Eli would come in late from the stables, smelling of hay and cold air. And little Will. Will would fall asleep in the most unexpected places, curled on a rug like a stray puppy who finally believed he belonged. James would watch all of it, quiet, stunned, as if he'd spent 4 years in darkness and had forgotten how bright a lamp could be. The man who came back to claim what wasn't his. Charles Hargreave did not forget. Men like him rarely do. Because when a man is used to getting what he wants, the first no doesn't teach him humility. It teaches him vengeance. The first months after James threatened him, Hargreave kept his distance. The mill ran quieter. The workers whispered that wages were suddenly fairer. People began to hope. And that, to a man like Hargreave, was intolerable. He wanted Sarah Bennet punished, not because she had stolen anything, but because she had dared to expose him. He wanted James Caldwell humiliated, because a wealthy landowner standing against him was a threat to his entire kingdom of fraud. So one morning in late autumn, when the trees had gone bare and frost returned to the fields, a letter arrived. Not to Sarah. To James. The paper was expensive. The handwriting precise. James read it once. Then again. Then he stared at the fire with the letter shaking in his hand. Sarah found him like that. "What is it?" she asked, fear already tightening her voice. James didn't answer at first. He handed her the letter. Sarah read it. And the color drained from her face. It wasn't just a threat. It was a plan. Hargreave claimed Sarah owed him money, back rent, damaged property, stolen linens, fabricated nonsense. He demanded she return to the mill property to settle the matter, or he would involve authorities. But the worst part was the last line. A quiet, poisonous sentence. "And if you are hiding on Caldwell land, I will ensure your children are placed where they belong." Sarah's breath caught. "They can't," she whispered. "They can't take my children." James's eyes darkened. "They won't." But he knew the truth. In that era, a widow with little money had fewer protections than anyone wanted to admit. If Hargreave could paint her as unstable, immoral, unfit. If he could convince the wrong judge. He could destroy her. Not because the law was just. But because power often wore the law like a glove. Sarah's hands trembled. "I should go," she whispered. "I should face him." James stepped closer. "No." Sarah's eyes flashed, pride meeting fear. "I can't hide behind your name forever." James's voice was low. "You're not hiding. You're surviving. And you're my wife." Her eyes softened, then filled with tears. "And if they take Eli," she whispered. James reached for her hands. "They won't." But the promise wasn't enough. James Caldwell had lived long enough to know. A promise without action is just a prayer whispered into the wind. So he acted. The colonel goes to war, with paper and truth. James did what he did best. He became relentless. He met with Amos. He met with village leaders. He rode to the county seat and spoke to lawyers who owed favors to the Caldwell name. But he didn't rely on favors alone. Because favors could be twisted. He needed evidence. Cold, undeniable evidence. And Sarah had something better than most people realized. She had been a washerwoman in a house of lies. And women who handled dirty laundry learned to notice stains. Sarah remembered names. Dates. Wages. The way ledgers were altered. The way supplies were charged but never delivered. She remembered workers' stories. And Eli, quiet, observant Eli, had heard men talk at the mill cabins. He didn't share much, but what he shared was precise. "Mama," Eli said one night, voice low. "Mr. Hargreave keeps papers in the office safe. Mr. Randall said he saw them. Papers that show the real wages." Sarah's stomach clenched. "How would we get them?" she whispered. James didn't hesitate. "We won't steal," he said firmly. "We'll force the truth into daylight." He wrote letters. To a journalist in Burlington. To a reform-minded attorney in Montpelier. To a state official who had been campaigning about labor abuses. He sent them carefully, not angry, not emotional. Factual. Detailed. And then he added the weight of his own name. "I am Colonel James Caldwell of Caldwell Farm, and I will testify to what I have learned." That was the difference. People ignored poor widows. They didn't ignore wealthy landowners. And within weeks, the air around Charles Hargreave began to shift. Men who once smiled at him stopped inviting him into rooms. Workers became bolder. Whispers turned to talk. Talk turned to investigation. And in early December, a sheriff arrived at the mill with paperwork in hand. Not an arrest warrant yet. But questions. Serious questions. Hargreaves' kingdom, built on fear and fraud, began to tremble. And when that happened, he did the thing desperate men always do. He attacked the nearest target. Sarah. The day the past showed its teeth. It happened on a bitter morning, the kind where the cold feels personal. Sarah was in the yard hanging linens. Yes, she still did much of the washing, not because she had to, but because the work kept her grounded. Hope slept inside, bundled and safe. Maggie was in the library. Eli was in the stables with Amos. Will was by Ruth's side like always. Sarah heard hooves. Sharp, fast. A rider came up the main path. Not Amos. Not a worker. A stranger, hard-faced, wearing a city coat that didn't belong on farmland. He dismounted without courtesy and approached with a folded paper. "Mrs. Bennet," he said. Sarah's skin went cold. "I'm Mrs. Caldwell," she answered automatically. The man smirked. "Still a Bennet on paper, ma'am. This is for you." She took the document and unfolded it. Her heart lurched. A summons. A legal demand to appear at the county courthouse. Charges: theft, breach of contract, and, worst, child endangerment. Sarah's hand pressed to her mouth. This wasn't about money. This was about painting her as unfit. The messenger leaned closer. "Mr. Hargreaves says if you don't come quietly, it'll be worse." Sarah's voice shook. "My children are safe here." The man's smile widened cruelly. "That's for the court to decide." Sarah's vision blurred. And then a voice cut through the icy air like a blade. "Get off my land." James had stepped out onto the porch. He moved like a man who had finally stopped being afraid of conflict. The messenger turned. "Colonel Caldwell," he said, trying to sound polite. James descended the steps slowly. His eyes were not violent. They were controlled. Which was far more terrifying. "Tell Charles Hargreave," James said, "that if he wants to drag my wife into court, he will be dragging me too." The messenger blinked. "Colonel, this is a legal matter." "And this," James replied, stepping closer, "is my home." He leaned in. "And if you step onto Caldwell land again to threaten my family, I will personally escort you to the edge of the county line and ensure you never forget the walk." The messenger swallowed, suddenly understanding that titles might not be military, but men like Caldwell could still make you regret underestimating them. He mounted quickly. And rode off. Sarah stood shaking. James turned to her. His voice softened instantly. "We will face this," he said. Sarah's eyes filled. "They'll say I'm unfit," she whispered. "They'll say I'm just a washerwoman." James took her hands. "They can say whatever they like." He looked straight into her eyes. "Truth will be louder." The courthouse and the crowd. The day of the hearing arrived just days before Christmas. Snow fell quietly as the Caldwell carriage rolled into town. Sarah wore her best dress, simple, clean, respectable. Her hair was pinned neatly. Her hands still shook, but she kept her chin lifted. James sat beside her, stone still and calm, like a man bracing against a storm he'd already survived once. Ruth insisted on coming. "So no one thinks she stands alone," Ruth said firmly. Amos came too. And Eli. Eli asked to come. Sarah hesitated. "It may be ugly," she warned. Eli's eyes hardened in that quiet way he had. "I've seen ugly," he said. I want to see justice." So they came. Outside the courthouse, the town had gathered. People loved scandal. And Sarah Bennett, poor widow, washerwoman, was exactly the kind of story they thought they could devour. Then they saw James Caldwell. And the murmurs shifted. "The colonel is here. He's standing with her." That alone changed everything. Inside, Charles Hargreaves sat smugly, dressed finely, flanked by a lawyer who looked expensive and hungry. He didn't look at Sarah like a person. He looked at her like an inconvenience that should have stayed quiet. The judge entered. Proceedings began. Hargreaves' lawyer spoke first. He painted Sarah as reckless, ungrateful, unstable. He claimed she had stolen goods. He claimed she had abandoned the mill property irresponsibly. He even implied, without saying it outright, that her children would be better off under proper care. Sarah's stomach twisted. Her fingers gripped the bench. Then James stood. "Permission to speak, Your Honor." The judge frowned, surprised. "Colonel Caldwell, you may." James's voice carried. Not loud, but clear. "This is not a case about stolen linens," he said. "This is a case about a man trying to silence a woman who exposed his theft." Hargreaves' lawyer scoffed. "Speculation." James lifted a hand. "I have evidence." The courtroom shifted. James presented letters. Testimony statements. Worker affidavits. Then, the journalist from Burlington stood. Then the reform attorney. Then, a worker from the mill. A man with rough hands and a trembling voice. "He cheated us," the man said. "For years. We were afraid to speak." The judge's expression sharpened. Hargreaves' lawyer began to sweat. Finally, Sarah was called. She stood. The room was silent. And Sarah spoke, not with dramatic flair, but with the steady truth of someone who had learned that dignity is not given. It is held. "I am not perfect," she said. "But I am a mother. I worked honestly. I cared for my children. I confronted wrong because I could not teach my children to accept it." She looked at the judge. "They can call me whatever they want. Washerwoman. Widow. Poor." Her voice didn't crack. "But I am not a liar." Then she looked at Hargreave, calm, unafraid. "And you know it." The judge stared at Hargreave for a long moment. Then he spoke. "Mr. Hargreave, your claims against Mrs. Caldwell are dismissed." Hargreave's face contorted. "This is outrageous." And, the judge continued, voice harder now, "Based on the testimonies and evidence presented, an investigation into your business practices will proceed immediately." The sheriff stepped forward. Hargreaves' smugness collapsed. For the first time, fear flashed across his eyes. Sarah's breath released. Her knees nearly gave out. James caught her arm gently. "You're safe," he whispered. Outside, as the Caldwell family emerged, the crowd watched, quiet now. Not hungry for scandal. Stunned by what they'd witnessed. A poor woman who had spoken truth. A powerful man who had chosen justice over convenience. And in that moment, Sarah realized something. Sometimes, protection isn't just a man standing in front of you. Sometimes it's a whole community learning to stand beside you. The only thing Hargreave couldn't steal. Hargreave was not arrested that day. Not yet. Legal systems moved slowly. But the investigation began, and that was enough. His workers began leaving. Other business partners distanced themselves. His reputation cracked like ice. He tried to recover with threats and bribes. But the story had escaped his control. That was the thing about truth. Once it breathes fresh air, it doesn't easily return to the cellar. And Sarah. Sarah slept that night without the fear clawing at her throat. Not because life had become easy, but because she knew she wasn't alone anymore. The Christmas supper that returned to the farm. As Christmas approached, Ruth began planning. Not quietly. Not timidly. Loudly. With purpose. She pulled out boxes that hadn't been opened in years, candlesticks, wreaths, ornaments. Maggie insisted they decorate a tree. Eli chopped the pine himself and hauled it inside like it was a trophy. Will wanted to hang cookies on it. Sarah laughed. No cookies, she said. The mice will hold a feast. Will looked crushed. James crouched. We'll make ornaments, he said. Real ones. The suggestion startled Sarah. James, participating. But he did. He sat at the table with the children, cutting paper, tying ribbons, making simple decorations like the ones Samuel used to make. The ache came, yes. But the ache didn't destroy him. It simply reminded him of what mattered. On Christmas Eve, Caldwell Farm looked different than it had in years. Warm light in every window. A wreath on the door. The smell of cinnamon and roasted meat drifting from the kitchen. Workers arrived, not fearful, not servile, but invited. With wives. With children. With laughter. Amos stood at the door greeting men he'd worked beside for decades. Ruth bustled around like a general. Sarah helped serve, not as a servant, but as family. And James Caldwell. James stood in the doorway for a moment watching it all. A farm that had once felt like a grave now looked like a home. He didn't know how to express what that meant. So he did something simple. He stepped forward. He welcomed people. And he smiled, really smiled, when children ran past him like they owned the place. Because maybe, in a way, they did. The moment that would have broken him before. Later that night, after supper, Maggie stood up. She cleared her throat. I wrote something, she said. The room quieted. James looked up, curious. Maggie held a paper with trembling hands. It's a poem, she said. About storms. Sarah's chest tightened. Eli watched his sister carefully. Will bounced in his seat. Hope slept in Sarah's arms. Maggie began to read. Her voice was soft at first. Then stronger. She spoke about a mother walking through rain like she was walking through grief itself. About a gate that opened when the world wanted to close. About a man so lonely he forgot his own heartbeat, until small voices reminded him. She ended with one line that made the room hold its breath. Some families are born. Some are found. And some are built in the exact moment you think you've lost everything. Silence. Then someone sniffled. Then another. Ruth wiped her eyes without shame. Amos's mouth trembled. James stared at Maggie as if she had spoken a truth he hadn't dared to say aloud. And then he stood. The room became still. People were used to Colonel Caldwell being distant, formal, silent. But James held a glass of cider. His hand trembled slightly. Not with weakness. With emotion. I want to make a toast, he said. Sarah's eyes widened. James looked around at the table. At workers he once saw as obligations. Now seeing them as people. At Ruth, who had saved him from himself. At Amos, who never stopped carrying the farm when James couldn't carry his own heart. At Eli, who had become a young man of honor. At Maggie, who had brought stories back into a house that was once a tomb. At Will, who laughed like sunlight. At Sarah, who had walked through a storm and didn't realize she was carrying a miracle with her. James swallowed. 1 year ago, he began, I was sitting in my library, waiting for Christmas to end like a punishment I had to endure. He exhaled. I thought I had nothing left. I thought life had already taken everything I could ever love. Sarah's throat tightened. James continued. And then, a mother knocked on my gate during a storm, holding her children like the world would swallow them if she loosened her arms. He looked at Sarah. And I almost told her to go away. His voice broke. Just slightly. I was so consumed by my own grief that I forgot other people had grief too. He looked at Ruth. But Ruth didn't let me. Ruth lifted her chin, eyes shining. James looked back to the room. And because that gate opened, everything changed. He raised his glass. This toast is for second chances. People murmured softly. For storms that bring us to the right door. For women who don't bow even when they have every reason to collapse. For children who remind us what joy sounds like. And for chosen families, he finished, voice steadier now, because sometimes God gives you a family twice. He paused. Then smiled. And this time, I won't waste it. Glasses lifted. To chosen families, Sarah whispered, voice trembling. To second chances, Eli said. To Christmas, Maggie added. Will shouted, 2 cookies. The room burst into laughter. Even James laughed. And it was real. After the house slept. Late that night, after the workers left and the children finally fell asleep, Hope in her crib, Will curled on a chair, Eli and Maggie upstairs, James and Sarah stood on the porch. Snow fell softly, like the sky was finally forgiving the land. Sarah leaned against James, her head resting on his shoulder. I was afraid, she whispered. I know, he said. I thought loving again would feel like betrayal. James's gaze stayed on the dark pines. I thought the same, he admitted. Sarah turned. Do you still miss her? James's breath caught. He didn't pretend. Yes, he said. Every day. Sarah nodded slowly, eyes wet. I'm glad you said that. James turned to her, surprised. Sarah's voice softened. Because I don't want to be loved in a way that demands you erase your past. I want to be loved in a way that honors it. James stared at her like she'd spoken a sacred truth. He cupped her face gently. You are the bravest person I have ever met, he whispered. Sarah smiled through tears. You weren't brave when I arrived, she whispered back. James laughed quietly. No, he admitted. But you taught me. He kissed her forehead. Thank you, he said, not just to her, but to the universe, to time, to whatever force had carried her to his gate. Sarah whispered back. Thank you, for opening it. The story that kept going. In the months that followed, the investigation into Hargreaves' mill ended exactly as it should have. He was forced to repay wages. He lost contracts. He lost standing. And eventually, he lost the thing he valued most. Control. Caldwell Farm became known not just for productivity, but for fairness. James funded a small schoolhouse in the village, named not after himself, but after Evelyn. Sarah volunteered there when she could. Maggie taught younger children to read. Eli grew into a leader among the farmhands and, in time, became Amos's right hand. Will remained Will, wild laughter, sticky fingers, sunlight disguised as a child. Hope grew strong. And every Christmas after that, Caldwell Farm remembered the truth that changed everything. A house can mourn for years. But it can also learn to live again. And that brings us to the end of today's story. But the journey of James, Sarah, and their children lives on, in the way we remember what love can do when it's given a second chance. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something deep, please give this video a like, and subscribe to Stories of the Season. And tell me in the comments. What was your favorite moment? Did Maggie's poem hit your heart too? Do you believe people can find love again after loss? Which character touched you most, Eli, Maggie, Will, Sarah, or Colonel Caldwell? And don't forget to turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss the next story. Because here on Stories of the Season, we believe that even in the coldest winters, even after the hardest storms, light can return. Sometimes it returns in the form of courage. Sometimes in the form of children's laughter. And sometimes it returns as a single knock at the gate on Christmas Eve. Thank you for listening. And I'll see you in the next story.